You see, one of the most perplexing realities when it comes to understanding women, especially a woman who is secretly drawn to you, is how often her behavior contradicts her words. She might say she's not interested. She might act detached, nonchalant, or even slightly cold. But when you're observant, when you learn to read energy rather than language, something doesn't add up. Her presence lingers even when her words walk away. This is the contradiction of suppressed desire. A woman may have every logical reason to avoid expressing what she truly feels. Fear of vulnerability, past emotional wounds, or a belief that showing desire makes her look weak or exposed. So she cloaks her emotions in indifference. But here's the catch. The body is far less loyal to the mask than the mind is. Her eyes betray her. Her tone softens unexpectedly. She lingers in conversation longer than necessary. You feel the warmth of her attention, even as her words try to sound dismissive. This isn't about overanalyzing or assuming interest where none exists. It's about recognizing the subtle emotional tension that arises when someone is both trying to feel and trying to hide. Think about it. Have you ever spoken to someone who said one thing, but something in their eyes begged you to hear what they didn't say? That's the energy we're talking about. That's the contradiction that exposes everything. Often, women are taught socially and emotionally not to be the ones who openly pursue. They're conditioned to wait, to hint, to desire from a distance. And so desire becomes coded. It doesn't disappear, it just takes a more complex form. That's why when a woman craves you in silence, she won't say it outright. But her behavioral inconsistencies are a dead giveaway. She might act indifferent in a group but steal glances when no one's watching. She might laugh a little too hard at your jokes, then pull back as if catching herself. This push-pull dynamic isn't random. It's emotional turbulence, the mind trying to hide what the heart is already screaming. The key is not to chase every signal blindly, but to pay attention to the patterns that contradict logic. When a woman says she doesn't care, but acts like she does, when she creates distance yet stays emotionally attuned to your presence, she's revealing more than she realizes. Understanding this helps you move beyond surface-level attraction. It sharpens your emotional intelligence, and it reminds you that true connection often lives between the lines, in the spaces where honesty and fear wrestle for control. So if you ever find yourself questioning, is she into me or am I imagining it? Don't just listen to her words. Watch her energy. Watch her silence. Because sometimes what she hides the most is exactly what matters most. Another often misunderstood sign that a woman is hiding her desire is emotional projection. It's subtle and it's often misinterpreted, but it's incredibly telling once you learn to recognize it. You see, when someone is carrying emotions they don't want to face, especially emotions they consider inconvenient or risky, they subconsciously begin to project those emotions onto others. For women who secretly crave you but feel the need to suppress that desire, projection becomes a kind of emotional camouflage. Instead of saying, "I think about you," she might accuse you, slightly or playfully, of being the one who's always thinking about her. Instead of admitting she wants your attention, she might tease you for always needing hers. It can come off as sarcasm, banter, or even irritation. But if you pay close attention, you'll see what's really happening underneath. A psychological attempt to displace her own feelings, because acknowledging them would require vulnerability. And that's not always safe for her. This isn't manipulation, it's protection. There's a difference. Projection is a defense mechanism, not a game. It's the mind's way of saying, "I feel this, but I don't want to own it, so I'll reflect it onto you instead." It can be both confusing and revealing. On the surface, it sounds like she's pointing fingers, but if you listen with emotional intelligence, you'll realize she's pointing a mirror at herself. Psychologically, this is rooted in what Carl Jung referred to as the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we suppress, deny, or disown. Desire, particularly when it's intense or irrational, often falls into this category. A woman might crave you, think about you, miss your presence, but she doesn't believe she should. Maybe it doesn't fit her identity, or maybe it threatens her emotional stability. So her unconscious finds another way to express it, through commentary, accusations, or passive remarks that seem to have nothing to do with affection, but in fact reveal everything. Here's the test. When she says something that feels like an exaggeration, like, "You're obsessed with me," or "You probably miss me more than I miss you," ask yourself, is there a gap between her words and her emotional tone? Is there a flicker of discomfort, a nervous laugh, a glint in her eyes that says more than her mouth dares to? That gap is where her truth lives, and it's that truth, unspoken yet loud, that reveals her hidden desire. So don't dismiss projection as just playfulness or sarcasm. Sometimes it's a confession wearing a mask. And if you're tuned in enough to see it, you'll realize she's not hiding her feelings from you. She's hiding them from herself. One of the most overlooked yet revealing behaviors a woman exhibits when she secretly desires someone is her pattern of selective attention and avoidance. It sounds contradictory, right? But psychologically, it's a fascinating duality. When a woman craves you but doesn't feel safe or ready to admit it to you or even to herself, her actions often swing between intense focus and sudden distance. And it's in this push and pull that the truth about her hidden feelings is quietly exposed. Let's break it down. If you notice that she remembers the small things you say, your favorite snack, a childhood story you told only once, a passing comment you made weeks ago, that's not just politeness. That's intentional awareness. Her mind is scanning for details, creating mental bookmarks, because something about you matters more than she's willing to admit. But here's where it gets interesting. She'll just as quickly withdraw. She may ignore your texts for hours, avoid eye contact, or change the subject when the conversation becomes emotionally charged. Why? Because the closeness she craves also threatens to reveal what she's working so hard to keep hidden. This alternating rhythm of attention and distance is rooted in what psychologists call approach avoidance conflict. It's when someone wants something but simultaneously fears the consequences of having it. Desire pulls her in, but vulnerability pushes her away. And it's not about immaturity or manipulation. It's about the internal conflict of being drawn to something deeply while not feeling entirely safe to act on it. In fact, this subtle behavioral contradiction is often more honest than overt expressions of attraction. When a woman openly flirts, we know where she stands. But when her actions whisper instead of shout, when she leans in only to step back, it tells us she's experiencing a real emotional struggle. Her restraint, her hesitation is a sign of just how powerful her feelings might be. The mistake many men make is interpreting this behavior as disinterest or inconsistency. But the truth is, it's often a shield, an emotional filter that protects her from rejection, embarrassment, or exposure. If you really want to understand her, you need to watch the space between the extremes. Her desire isn't always in what she says or does boldly. It's in what she stops herself from doing. So don't be fooled by the distance. Don't assume the silence means absence. Sometimes her quiet retreat is simply her heart trying to hide what her attention has already confessed. And if you're wise enough to see the truth behind the contradiction, you begin to understand what most never will. There's a peculiar kind of intimacy in contradiction when her words say one thing, but her actions hint at something else entirely. And perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in the way a woman subtly mirrors the person she secretly desires. Not in the obvious, playful mimicry you might see in flirtation, but in the unconscious adaptation of your rhythm, your speech patterns, your energy. This is not performance, it's resonance. Her being tunes itself to yours, not to impress, but because it naturally syncs with what it longs for. Mirroring is a well-studied psychological behavior. In relationships, romantic or otherwise, it is a non-verbal signal of connection and empathy. But when it comes from a place of hidden desire, it becomes even more powerful. If you pay attention, you may notice that she adopts your phrases, starts using your kind of humor, shifts her body language when you do, or even aligns her lifestyle choices subtly with yours. It's not imitation for flattery. It's a quiet alignment. Her inner world adjusting to match yours because something in her feels drawn toward your energy. Yet the real complexity lies in the fact that she often does this without fully realizing it. And that's the beauty and tragedy of hidden desire. It finds expression through instinct. A woman who craves you but hasn't admitted it to herself, or won't allow herself to express it, will reveal everything through the micro movements of behavior. And while you might overlook it in the moment, it's often the truest language of longing, But then comes the dissonance. While she mirrors you in moments of vulnerability or closeness, she may suddenly shift back into detachment when she catches herself. She might pull away from the interaction, become cold, or reestablish emotional distance, not because the desire has disappeared, but because proximity threatens exposure. To mirror is to reflect, and reflection, if noticed, makes the hidden visible. That's what she's protecting. This subtle dance, drawn in, then stepping back, is how many women manage their craving in silence. It's not a game, it's self-preservation. In a world that often punishes women for desiring openly or labels them for expressing interest first, these behavioral shifts are deeply rooted in emotional conditioning. The fear of being too much, too obvious, too vulnerable, it all feeds into why her attraction shows up in whispers instead of declaration. So if you're truly observant, don't just listen to her words. Watch her patterns. Notice what shifts when you enter the room. Pay attention to how her energy molds itself around yours when no one's watching. That's not coincidence. That's unspoken craving, shaping behavior in real time. There's a quiet power in the moments when she disappears. Not the kind of absence that stems from indifference or disinterest, but the kind rooted in inner conflict, emotional overload, or unspoken yearning. When a woman craves you, yet hides it, one of the most telling behaviors is her withdrawal after moments of closeness. It's not that she doesn't want you, it's that the closeness reveals too much. And that for her is dangerous. You see, desire, when it's not meant to be exposed, creates friction within the self. She might laugh with you, lean into your presence, even show signs of vulnerability, but just as quickly she'll retract. She might stop replying to your messages, cancel plans last minute, or become cold and formal where once there was warmth. And this inconsistency isn't a sign of emotional immaturity or manipulation. More often than not, it's the psychological expression of a deeper truth. She feels something, and it scares her. This retreat is a defense mechanism. Her mind is trying to reestablish control over emotions that feel risky. Maybe she's been hurt before. Maybe she's been conditioned to believe that wanting something or someone this deeply only leads to disappointment. So rather than allow herself to be seen in her full craving, she vanishes. Emotionally or even physically, silence becomes a form of self-protection. But here's where it gets layered. That withdrawal is never clean. Because in the background, she'll still be watching, checking your stories, listening when others mention you, maybe even creating subtle opportunities to reappear just to feel your presence again. She wants you to notice her absence, but she won't say that. She wants you to feel her pull without her having to state it. It's the push-pull dynamic of someone who's both drawn to the flame and terrified of being burned. To a man who isn't paying attention, this might read as mixed signals. But if you've been listening with more than your ears, if you've been watching with understanding, you'll know that her absence isn't the absence of feeling. It's the echo of it. It's the unspoken sign that something has been stirred in her and she's trying to make sense of it in solitude. There's a kind of vulnerability in silence, in withdrawal, in vanishing after vulnerability. And it requires emotional intelligence on your part, not to chase, not to pressure, but to hold space with dignity. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't pursuit, it's presence. Letting her know through your steadiness that she's safe to return when ready, that you saw what was real, even when it was masked. There's a subtle but profound sign that often goes unnoticed when a woman is quietly craving you. She remembers the smallest details. Not just the big, bold moments, but the tiny, almost forgettable things you've shared in passing. The way you take your coffee, a story about your childhood, that offhand comment you made about your dreams or your fears. Most people overlook this behavior, dismissing it as basic politeness or a good memory. But when a woman stores your nuances with care, when she recalls them unprompted, what she's really doing is revealing emotional investment. Think about it. Attention is a currency. In a world overflowing with distractions, giving someone your full attention, especially to details that aren't outwardly significant, is an act of intimacy. When she brings up something you told her weeks ago, not to flatter you, but because it genuinely stayed with her, that's emotional imprinting. That's not casual, that's connection. This kind of memory is not just mental, it's emotional. We tend to remember what touches us, what stirs something within us. And when she remembers your words, your habits, your quirks, it's a sign she's not just observing you, she's internalizing you. She's letting you live in her mind long after the conversation ends. But here's the paradox. She may never admit it. She might play it off, smile and say, "Oh, I just remember weird things," but make no mistake, she remembers you because she feels you. And this sign often appears in conversations where she circles back to something you didn't even think she heard. Maybe you said you love silence after a long day, and she subtly makes sure your next encounter is quieter. Maybe you mentioned your mother's favorite song, and she references it weeks later in a metaphor or a joke. These aren't coincidences. They're threads she's weaving between herself and you, quietly and deliberately, in the language of detail. What's striking is how this behavior contrasts with how she might present herself otherwise. She could appear emotionally guarded, she might not openly flirt or confess any attraction, but this attention to your inner world reveals where her heart is leaning. It's not about grand gestures, it's about emotional attunement. This is where most people get it wrong. They look for signs in the obvious, in the dramatic, but desire, especially when concealed, lives in the quiet corners, in what's remembered, in what's repeated, in what's reflected back to you without ever being claimed outright. So, if she knows more about you than you realized you shared, if she seems to just know what matters to you without you having to explain it, understand that this is more than awareness. This is intimacy wearing the mask of casualness.